The Vigil, a Sentinel trilogy story by Brian Bullock, a Starborne Studios production. This story takes place on the last night before Daedalus went to sleep. It is the story of the last man awake and what he wrote before he closed his eyes. The station had never been this quiet. Oran sat at his desk in the commander's office and listened to it. The unfamiliar stillness of Daedalus without people in it. Not silence exactly, but the absence of the frequencies people produced simply by existing. Footsteps, voices, the low hum of thousands of bodies going about the business of being alive. He had commanded this station for 11 years and had never once stopped to notice how much of its texture came from the people inside it. He noticed now. 3,041 people were sleeping in the Stasis bay. He had walked through it one last time before coming here, not to check the systems, but simply to be there once more in the blue light, to see the faces of people he had commanded and argued with and eaten meals beside. All of them still now, trusting that the systems would hold and something on the other side of the sleep would be worth waking into. He had moved through the rows without touching anything, reading names on pods he had authorized and filed paperwork for. When he reached the end of the last row, he stood there for a while, trying to remember the many interactions, some good, some a little more argumentative, both now quiet. After a few minutes more, he walked back to the office. He had come to this station as a junior administrator 22 years ago and had never left. When offered other postings, he had declined them all. Arriving at this facility, he knew almost instantly this was the right fit and had not seen the point of leaving it. What no one knew was that he came to the Arboretum on the nights he couldn't sleep. It was a small room on the tertiary ring, officially a botanical research station, used by almost no one. On the nights when command sat too heavily on him, he would go there and stand among the growing things and let the smell of soil and plants do their magic. He could not have explained why it helped. It simply did. Someone had been tending the plants for years. He didn't know who. The not knowing was part of what he liked about it. Someone took care of the plants, fed and watered them. In turn, the plants allowed him to find peace of mind. He had gone there last night, had stood for a long time with his hands at his sides, eyes closed, and let the smells of all the plants in the Arboretum surround him one last time. He left without saying anything at all. The plague had killed 114 people in 8 months. He wrote that number at the top of the log and looked at it for a moment. 114. He had known every one of them, some by name, and some by the records he kept. Commanders know the people under their command, different from friendship but not entirely separate from it. He wrote the formal opening of the log, Station Daedalus, final pre-suspension log, Commander Oran, commanding officer, current date, the 412th day of the outbreak, station population entering full stasis suspension, 3,041. Total personnel, 3,042. All essential systems confirmed operational. The station is prepared to sustain the suspension for the estimated duration. He stopped. For the estimated duration. He had automatically written it like he had written it so many times before. It was accurate in every formal sense, but dishonest in the way that mattered. There was no estimated duration. They were going to sleep and they did not know when they would wake, or even if they would wake. The form had that description field because it had been designed for scheduled suspensions of known length. Nothing about this was known. He drew a line through the last sentence. In 30 years, he had never drawn a line through anything in an official log. He looked at what he had done. The form had been a lie. The line was the first true thing on it. He picked up the stylus again and wrote below the line, there is no estimated duration. I do not know how long we will sleep. I cannot know if we will even wake from our sleep, or if the plague will be gone when we do. What I know is that the station is prepared as much as can be expected, and everyone I could protect is protected. That is what I can say honestly. Everything else is hope. Years of meetings and schedules, documenting everything that happened to everybody on this station. The friendships made, the lives the plague took, countless families destroyed, all condensed into exactly 2 paragraphs. He had filled several pages with the technical record, system states, personnel accounting, medical summaries, the sequence of decisions documented in the careful official documentation. It was accurate and complete. It was also beside the point, because the technical record was already in the station systems. The log he was writing, he wasn't entirely sure who it was for. He stood, walked to the viewport, and looked at the moon, gray and still. A reminder of how small humanity is compared to the universe, but also how small in overall lifespan in comparison, and entirely indifferent to what was happening in the station above it. He turned with those thoughts circulating in his head, walked back to his office, sat down, and continued writing. I am going to stop writing the official record now. What I want to write is something different. It does not belong in a commander's log, but I am going to write it anyway. I am the last person awake on this station, and I will decide what belongs in the log, at least this one last time. I have been a commander for 11 years. In that time, I've learned that how you present yourself to the people under your command is only half of who you are. There's also a personal side, the side that shows compassion, love, and the willingness to say to hell with the rules. But that is the side of a commander you cannot allow yourself to show. That is not dishonesty, but more of a necessity. Tonight there is no one to present the other version to. Tonight there is only the full version, which is considerably less steady than the one I have been showing people for the last 8 months. What I am feeling tonight is fear, not fear of dying. I have made what peace I can with that. What I'm afraid of is the gap, the space between closing my eyes tonight and opening them again, which might be years or decades or never. I have spent a little over a decade as a commander. The entirety of my adult life as a person doing the work, whatever was required of me. The idea of simply not being present, not dead, neither here nor not here, is something my mind keeps approaching and then shying away from, like a person approaching the edge of something they cannot see the bottom of. We are all jumping. I just happen to be the last to the edge, and I am going to jump. Because the people I care about are already down there, and that is where I need to be. He wrote about them generally and kept the specifics to himself. There is a researcher who argued with me about resource allocation for 7 months before I admitted she was right. She was right from the beginning. I argued because the answer required a restructuring I didn't want to do, and because I had the authority to delay it. The morning I finally said so, she looked at me and said, "I know," not with satisfaction, with the exhaustion of someone who has been arguing for some time about it and is relieved finally. The resource allocation can move forward. She is in pod 714. I hope when she wakes up, the first thing she does is argue with someone again, loudly, until they admit she's right. There is a pilot who, on the day I had forgotten to eat for 14 hours, came to my office, set food on my desk, and left without a word. Did not knock, did not wait for acknowledgement, just left the food and went back to the flight schedule. That pilot is in pod 203. I noticed everything. I just didn't always say so. A failure of character or professionalism, maybe both. Something I intend to correct the next chance I get. Starting with saying thank you for the food. There is a medic who held the hand of every single person who died in the outbreak. Not one of them died alone. I asked why. The medic said, because no one should go through that alone. As if it were obvious. As if it were simply what you did. That medic is in Pod 891. There is no category in the official record for sitting with the dying, so that no one died alone. But it will be in this log. And this log is a record too. There is an engineer in the lower decks who kept the life support running through 2 system failures in the 3rd month. He never told anyone how close it came to going wrong. I found out from the maintenance records 3 weeks later. I called the engineer in and asked why I hadn't been informed. The answer was, you had enough to carry. That engineer is in Pod 470. I have thought about that answer for months. I still don't know if it was the right call, but I know it was made for the right reasons. He wrote for a while. Not all of them. There were 3,041 of them, and the night was not that long. But the ones who had stayed with him, the ones whose qualities he would carry into the sleep were the ones he had hoped to carry out of it. I don't know if any of them will read this. I don't know if I'll be alive to find out. But it felt necessary to write it down, and I have spent long enough as a commander to know that when something feels necessary, you do it, and you figure out why later. He walked through the station for the last time, not the Stasis Bay. He had done that already. Just the station itself, letting his feet go where they wanted to go. The common mess. He stood in the doorway without going in. He had eaten here most mornings, usually early, usually alone. The hour before the main meal shift had always been the best time to think. The tables were clean. The chairs were tucked in. Everything was as it should be, empty and quiet. He understood for the first time how much of what he had liked about those early mornings was the knowledge that soon people would enter the mess hall, followed by the sound of talking and laughing about everyday things. He continued walking. The research wing. He walked its length slowly, reading the names on the doors. The work done behind those doors over 22 years was in the archive now, sealed and waiting. He thought about the researcher in Pod 714 and hoped she would be among the first awake. The next commander would be wrong about something, and she would be the first one to correct him. The Arboretum. He had been there last night and hadn't planned to come back, but here he was. He didn't go in. This was just looking, saying a quiet goodbye before the world changed. Lastly, the observation deck. The stars were the same as they had always been for the past 20-some years. Vast, patient, and burning through their own fuel at a rate that made the entire span of Kethri civilization look like a single breath. Oran looked at them and felt something somewhere between grief, gratitude, and the feeling of caring about something you cannot interact with or control. He loved this station. He said it out loud, to the empty deck, because he was the last person awake, and it was true. The stars were not going to report him to anyone. I love this station, he said. I love the people in it. I'm going to do my best to be there when they all wake up. The stars continued to shine. He nodded at them, managed a small grin, and went back to his desk. Whoever reads this, whenever you read this, however much time has passed, I want you to know that the people in these pods are good people. Ordinary people who did the work that needed to be done, cared for each other, and faced something terrible with more steadiness than I had any right to expect. They deserve to wake up. They deserve a future worth waking into. Take care of them. That is all I ask. Commander Oran, Station Daedalus, the last entry. He closed the log, sealed it to the archive, and sat for a little while longer because he was not quite ready, and he had earned the right to not be ready for a few more minutes. The station breathed around him, the tick and settle of a structure maintaining itself in the cold of space, the low hum of systems running on automated cycles. He had trusted it with everything he had. Then he stood up, straightened his coat, and walked to the stasis bay without another word. The blue light, the rows of pods, each one sealed and steady, each one containing a life suspended. The moment after the choice and before the outcome, he walked to his pod, stood beside it for a moment. The readings were nominal. The preservation systems were running exactly as designed. He thought about the log, about the researcher who had been right when he was wrong, about the pilot who had brought him food and not mentioned it, about the medic who had held the hands of the dying, about 3,041 other people sleeping in this room, trusting the station and each other. He climbed into the pod, confirmed each prompt with care, his biometrics, his command authorization, the final confirmation that this entry was voluntary and understood. Even here, even now, precision had been ingrained in him for so long that it had become a form of respect. The pod was warmer than he expected. It felt like being held, slightly, like the way a mother comforts her child, warm and inviting. He was afraid. He acknowledged this directly, without looking away from it. He was afraid of the drop with no visible bottom, the gap between closing his eyes and whatever came next. He was going to close them anyway, because there was no alternative, and because this mattered as much as anything he had ever done. The preservation cycle deepened. His thoughts took on the quality of things seen through water. He was aware of his own heartbeat, aware of 3,041 people sleeping around him and the station holding it all together above them all. The last thing in his mind before the dark was not fear. It was the arboretum, the pilot's consideration, the medic's hand, and 3,041 lives in the dark around him, and the satisfaction of having done his job to the very end. That was the last thing. The pod sealed. Commander Oran, last awake, let his eyes close. The blue light cycled. The stars burned outside, like they had for billions of years. 11,000 years later, when the station woke, the log would still be there. Etune, the station's AI, who would later be named Alana, would find it on the first day. She would read every word and carry it quietly for a long time. The researcher who had always been right, the pilot who had brought food and not mentioned it, the medic who had held the hands of the dying, the commander who had been afraid and climbed into the pod anyway. She had known them all. She had kept them while they slept. Take care of them. That is all I ask. She had. The end. The Vigil is a short story set in the world of the Sentinel of Crater Daedalus, Book 1.8 of the Sentinel trilogy. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and follow me on X at EveryoneKNWS1 for more. It's part of a much bigger universe. 3 novels, more short stories on the way, and a podcast called Everyone Knows, where I break down what's really going on in the world. You can find all of it at brianbullochwriter.com. I'm Brian Bullock, and this is Starborne Studios.